Alrighty, I have 11 o'clock, so I'm going to get us started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It is Flood Awareness Week, and so we are kicking off the week with a joint presentation about flood insurance and the National Flood Insurance Program. I am Sarah Thunberg. I am one of the National Flood Insurance Program state coordinators here at the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs within the Office of Planning and Development. I have my coworker Stephanie Frechette here with me, as well as Luann King from the New Hampshire Insurance Department. So we are going to first give a presentation about the National Flood Insurance Program, its benefits, as well as different flooding hazards in the state of New Hampshire. And then we will finish off with some insurance or some information about private insurance options. All right, so the agenda for the BEA portion of this presentation is going to start with the flooding hazards, overview of the National Flood Insurance Program, private insurance options, and then flood insurance resources. All right, so flooding hazards in the state of New Hampshire. So it is, or we are recognizing that it has been 20 years since the 2006 Mother's Day flood, which was one of the largest floods that we've experienced in southern and central New Hampshire. And I wanted to start off talking about flooding hazards because it is natural for rivers to change and meander over time. And so when we are thinking about floodplains, we need to remember that these are not static rivers. They will, the bends tend to get bendier as time goes on. And this picture that I have here is of a river in Alaska that has not been impeded by any kind of human alteration or development. And as you can see, these areas where it is the old shoreline of the river, over time, this bend has pushed southward, and the bend of the river has gotten more extreme. And so this is just to emphasize that it is natural for rivers to change over time. And here I have an example of the Schwillet River going through Keene. And one thing that I wanted to note here is this river bend on the southern portion of the river is right next to a development, and as this river would behave naturally over time, this bend would expand into the development. And this is just to emphasize that when you are developing near rivers, you need to be aware of the fact that the river likely will not stay in the same point or same place, and it is important to build to the standards of the minimum floodplain regulations. I did get a comment saying that you cannot see the screen. I don't know if anyone else is also having the issue, but we tested it. Okay, same issue. I'm not okay. There are people who can see it, so I think it might be an issue. Might need to restart. or re-log into the presentation. But okay, I'm going to continue if we do have people who are able to see the content. Alrighty, so the kinds of flooding that we experience in New Hampshire can be categorized into a few different types. The most common one that you'd be familiar with is river/inland flooding. This is where the water levels of the river rise over the tops of the riverbanks due to excessive rainfall, persistent thunderstorms, and snow melt. These tend to be long duration on the order of days. And they tend to be a little bit more predictable because they are created through these large weather events that are a little easier to see coming because they are so large. And because it is a river flood, generally the flooding will spread out along the mapped floodplain, making it easier to plan for. However, the rivers can span through the entire state, making their impact area very large. On the other hand, we also have flash flooding in New Hampshire. Now, this is produced by excessive rainfall in a short period of time, generally less than 6 hours. And this creates high velocity torrents of water that rip through riverbeds, urban streets, or mountain canyons after heavy rains. These are short duration on the scale of minutes to hours, have a very small but very devastating area of impact. It can be only a single town or a single portion of a town that is impacted. And generally, these waters will drain into the floodplain, but anywhere that it can rain, you can get a flash flood. So even if you're on top of a hill, you can experience a flash flood, and that can have very devastating impacts. One thing I wanted to share here is that so I've got a picture on the top of Goshen and a picture on the bottom from Alexandria. Both were flash flooding incidents here in New Hampshire. Now, the top picture, you can see where the water carved a new channel through this person's front yard and eroded away all of this sediment. Now, where the sediment gets eroded, it also needs to be deposited somewhere. And so down here, is a picture of the base of a hill with an intersection of multiple roads. And over the course of a few hours, 4 to 5 feet of sand and gravel were deposited at the base of this intersection. This is a stop sign. And so you can see exactly how high that gravel would have had to pile up to make it to nearly the base of the stop sign. Something we also see in New Hampshire is storm surge and coastal flooding. This is something that the seacoast area is very familiar with. It is caused by, or it is the inundation of land areas along the coast caused by an abnormal rise in water level. This can be a higher than average high tide. It could be because of heavy rain, or onshore wind, or you can have all of those coinciding at the same time to exacerbate the normal flooding. These tend to be longer duration on the order of hours to days, large area of impact, pretty much the entire coastline. However, these do tend to stay within the mapped floodplain areas and can be a bit more predictable due to the timing of high tides, which are predictable, as well as a large coastal storm, which can be a little bit more predictable than an individual thunderstorm, for instance. All right, so the last type of flooding that we can see, which is actually would be happening about this time of year, is ice jam. So ice jam floods are when you get a large pile of chunks of ice that get piled up at a narrow bent or a narrow channel within the river. And then this restricts the flow of water, making it quickly rise upstream of that ice jam. These are variable duration, essentially, as long as that ice jam is in place, the flooding will continue. Tend to be lower predictability because it's just the random accumulation of ice. And generally, this will spread out within the mapped floodplain, and can have a very large area of impact. And what this picture that I have here is an ice jam that happened to the right off of the picture in Alaska. And the water built up upstream of the flood and actually, or upstream of the dam, and actually flooded out an entire town. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie, and she's going to talk about some of the benefits of the National Flood Insurance Program.
Thanks, Sarah. So now that you're aware of some types of flooding and understand that all areas have some risk of flooding, we will be discussing the National Flood Insurance Program and the flood insurance that's available through that. And so first, we're going to provide an overview of the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, what it is, how it works, to make flood insurance available to municipalities as well as residents of those municipalities. Firstly, what is this program? The National Flood Insurance Program is a voluntary partnership between FEMA and participating communities, and this program was created by Congress in 1968. There's three main components to this program. One is knowing your risks through floodplain mapping. Another is reducing your risks through floodplain regulations. And thirdly, insuring those risks through flood insurance. And we'll be touching on each of these components today, just to provide you with more context and understanding of how this program works and what communities need to be aware of. Even though this is a voluntary program, 94% of New Hampshire communities are participating in the program. In order for a community to participate, they agree to adopt and enforce local floodplain regulations that meet the minimum NFIP requirements that are set forth by FEMA. Flood insurance is then made available for purchase for all property owners and residents, including renters in that community. As I mentioned, in New Hampshire, 94% of communities are participating in the NFIP. So just a small percentage of communities are not participating. This map was generated in 2022, but it is still relevant today. Participating communities are shown in white, and the non-participating communities are shown in red. So we'll go through some different roles and responsibilities that exist at the federal, state, and local levels, starting with FEMA. So NFIP is a FEMA program, and they are overseeing this program from the federal level. FEMA's responsibilities are to make flood insurance available through insurance companies for property owners, residents, and renters in participating communities. They're responsible for developing the flood maps, providing development and building guidance and national program oversight, as well as monitoring participating communities to ensure compliance with the program. The NFIP is implemented at the state level by our office, which is the Office of Planning and Development, and our office is the state coordinating office of the NFIP. Our job is to help you implement effective floodplain management programs in your communities. So here at the state side, we provide technical assistance to all stakeholders, including answering questions from community officials, surveyors, engineers, developers, and residents on issues related to mapping updates, understanding requirements for development activities proposed in the floodplain, updating ordinance regulations to include the NFIP language. We also provide education and outreach resources such as model floodplain regulations, fact sheets, and sample permits. We also provide assistance after a disaster when rebuilding is occurring and making sure that minimum NFIP requirements are being met. When mapping updates are coming up for communities, we provide oversight of the mapping process and communicate with municipalities to make sure zoning ordinances adequately address NFIP compliant language in floodplain management regulations. We also review ordinances, provide guidance on the state model ordinance language, and assist communities as needed to ensure compliance with this program. At the community level, as a participant of NFIP, the community's responsibilities are for the community to understand the floodplain regulations and understand how to use the FEMA maps, ensuring local permits are applied for all development in the special flood hazard area, review and process permit applications for development occurring in the floodplain, ensuring any floodplain development is built according to approved permits and floodplain regulations, and taking action to correct any violations if and when they occur. So we'll briefly touch on the FEMA floodplain maps, including what they are and how they're used. FEMA's floodplain maps are called flood insurance rate maps, or FIRMs. And what this is a map that is developed by FEMA using detailed surveying, engineering, hydrologic, and hydraulic analyses. And these maps highlight the areas of land that are expected to flood during the 1% annual chance flood, which is formerly known as the 100-year flood. They also identify types of flood zones, the base flood elevation, and more data like that. These maps are used as the official floodplain designation for regulation purposes. The maps can show different flood zones that exist in a community. The most common flood zones that we see are A and AE, as well as AO and AH for inland areas, and V and VE for coastal areas. The different flood zones can show that there are varying risks of flooding, and therefore there's certain floodplain management regulations that will apply to a certain community. To give you an idea of what the FEMA floodplain maps look like, here's an example of a map. In the blue area, this is the 1% annual chance flood area, which is formerly known as the 100-year flood area. The yellowish brown area is the 0.2% annual chance flood, which is formerly known as the 500-year flood area. And the map also shows the floodway in red stripes and the base flood elevations, which are circled in yellow. There you go. One of the requirements of NFIP is for communities to reference FEMA's current map in their floodplain management regulations and to use information in those maps for planning purposes, such as building within the floodplain. FEMA goes through a process of updating these maps about every 10 to 15 years, and this process is currently happening in New Hampshire. It's based on watershed, not necessarily communities, and so communities may be on a different schedule depending on the watershed. FEMA mapping updates, this process can take 5 years or more from start to finish. So it starts with basically data collection and compiling the maps, and it results in updated floodplain maps to be adopted by the community in the zoning ordinance and used as a planning resource for building within the floodplain. By the time FEMA issues what is called a letter of final determination, which is one of the final steps in the mapping update process, this starts a 6-month clock for communities to adopt the updated maps into their floodplain management regulations before the maps become effective. So here is a little diagram of the mapping update process. It's a multi-step process that starts with data collection, and it ends in the production of the FEMA flood insurance rate maps called FIRMs, as well as another document called, excuse me, the Flood Insurance Study Report. And by the time FEMA issues the letter of final determination, like I mentioned, this starts a 6-month clock for communities to adopt the updated maps into their floodplain management regulations of the zoning ordinance before the new maps become effective. For some communities, the maps are becoming much more detailed. So here I'll show you a before, and then this one here is the updated map. So in purple, these are areas that are being removed, and yellow is areas that are being added. So again, here's the before and after. So you can see the updated maps have much more detail and they're more accurate. So I'll hand it back over to Sarah to go over floodplain regulations.
All right. So, as a participating community of the National Flood Insurance Program, FEMA requires communities to adopt floodplain regulations that have minimum standards determined by FEMA. This is to ensure that all development that happens within a floodplain is flood informed, and the building construction is good enough to withstand the 1% annual chance flood. So the community must have a process for adopting and enforcing floodplain management regulations. And the purpose of these regulations are to ensure that building in the floodplain is allowed. However, some communities can adopt higher standards that prohibit development within the floodplain. And these community regulations must pertain to all development in the special flood hazard area, regardless of whether or not a property has flood insurance. The floodplain regulations will still apply. So just a brief overview of what these regulations are applicable for. So when done correctly, floodplains can be a great use for certain kinds of development, and it depends on the community's level of regulations for exactly what is and is not prohibited. But first, FEMA defines development as any man-made change to the terrain in the special flood hazard area. This includes regular building and structure development, as well as drilling, grading, paving, mining, excavation, filling, storage of equipment or materials. So really any man-made change to the land. So the specific development requirements are going to be dependent on the community that participates. Not every community participates in New Hampshire. So if you are considering development within the floodplain, you want to check with your local floodplain administrator and look at the community zoning ordinance, which should have all of the floodplain development requirements stated in there. All right, so briefly, I want to talk about insurance pricing for the National Flood Insurance Program. So recently, within the last 5 years, the National Flood Insurance Program has started a new premium rating methodology called Risk Rating 2.0. And this will price the insurance premium based off of the location of a building or structure, taking into account whether or not it is in a community with higher standards, or how far it is from flooding sources. It will also look at the building contents and use, whether or not it is a residential or commercial building. Um, the construction design, taking into account the number of stories, basement, foundation types, and all of that is factored into the pricing for an individual policy. So now, in the past, the policies used to be just based off of the flood zone. Now it takes into account all of the different risk factors for a particular building. So it is a more fair price approach based off of risk. So I did briefly want to talk about the community rating system. So the community rating system is eligible for all participating communities. It is a voluntary program that rewards communities for adopting higher than the minimum NFIP standards. So the CRS program, it provides discounted insurance premiums for all residents that have a NFIP policy within a CRS participating community. It is different than just adopting higher standards where, or in that it actually provides a insurance discount, and different floodplain management activities will earn a community different amounts of points. And for every 500 points a community receives, that is then followed by a 5% insurance premium discount. So a prerequisite of participating in the CRS program is already being a participating NFIP community, and passing a audit to ensure that all of the administration procedures and regulations are sufficient for FEMA. And we also hold quarterly meetings for all of the CRS communities within New Hampshire. This is a really good opportunity to discuss concerns about the program, or talk about new projects that a town is looking to pursue. And generally, we just encourage participation because, again, it helps everyone within the community. It helps with having safer development as well as providing lower insurance premiums for residents. So we have many resources throughout our YouTube page as well as our website. There's a lot of resources through FEMA as well, where you can view the maps and preliminary maps. But now I am going to pass it over to Luann to talk about the New Hampshire Insurance Department.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Luann King, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm the supervisor for PNC forms compliance here at the New Hampshire Insurance Department. And today I'm going to give an insurance perspective on flooding in New Hampshire, covering both the federal flood insurance option as well as private flood insurance options, who needs it, why it's important, average costs and differences between the policy types, and also what to do after a flood. So let's start with some important flood facts in New Hampshire. Floods are the most common natural hazards in the United States, which causes ranging from heavy precipitation to hurricanes, winter storms, and snow melt. Over the past 50 years, Americans have seen a 20% increase in the heaviest of downpours. The size of the nation's floodplains will likely grow by 40 to 45% over the next 90 years. 99% of U.S. counties have been impacted by flooding since 1996. And over the course of a 30-year mortgage, homeowners in the 100-year floodplain, which is now called the 1% annual flood chance, they have a 1 in 4 chance or greater of being flooded, which is twice the probability of fire damage. And floods can happen everywhere. Just because you don't live in what they consider a high-risk area does not mean that you're exempt from the peril of flooding. We were talking a little bit ago that this is our 20th anniversary for the Mother's Day flood. 2026 is the 20th anniversary. That flood, we saw over 14 inches of rain that fell over several days. It was a federal disaster declared in 7 New Hampshire counties. It was the worst flood since 1938. Over 5,000 homes and businesses were evacuated, over 600 roads were closed, 60 were washed out, and there were more than $14 million in damages reported. So even communities considered in a low-risk area still have a substantial danger of being flooded. It's not a coastal or a riverfront issue. It impacts the entire state. So before we get started, you need to know which kind of flood insurance is best for you. There's one kind that you're going to be required to have. If you're purchasing a property that has a federally backed mortgage, you will be required to obtain federally backed flood insurance if you're in a high-risk flood zone. Other than that, you are able to purchase private flood insurance independently, or some people will find it beneficial to layer the two if you're required to have the federal, but it's not going to reach the limits that you need it to reach, which we're going to get to in a slide or two. You can also supplement a federal insurance policy with private insurance. So you need to consider your risk tolerance and what you're willing to assume, because not everything is going to be covered by one specific policy. New Hampshire renters are also able to purchase flood insurance. It can be a very inexpensive policy, but it can provide important coverage for your contents coverage, because your typical homeowner, renters, or condominium policy will always exclude flood coverage. So you can't say, well, I've got an insurance policy at home that'll cover that, because if you read your policy, the peril of flood will be excluded from your typical homeowners, renters, and condominium. So it's important that you know before a flood happens what you need to have for coverage. Let's talk a little bit about the NFIP program. It is federally regulated and subsidized, and it's required, again, if you live in a high-risk area and have a federally backed mortgage. The average premium, and this is just an average, is between $600 and $700 annually, but there are important considerations to know. The maximum amount of limit for the dwelling itself on an NFIP policy is $250,000. You have to ask yourself if that's sufficient for your dwelling. It also caps out at $100,000 for contents. This is where I was saying, if you do have this as your base flood policy, you're able to supplement with a private flood policy that could get you to the limits that you're really looking for. Also, the NFIP product does not offer a loss of use. So in the event that your dwelling is flooded and you cannot stay at your property, it's not going to provide you any money for you to live elsewhere. And typically there's a 30-day waiting period before your policy coverage will kick in after you've started a policy. The private flood insurance market is sold by for-profit companies, and they depend on reinsurers or money collected from premium in order to cover the loss. meaning that this is one of the differences. This product is not federally backed. The private flood insurance policy will cover dwellings, other structures, the loss of use that we spoke about recently, the resiliency and damaged contents. You're able to get higher limits and enhanced coverage with private flood insurance versus the federal product. By that, I mean you can go over the 250 maximum building coverage and over the 100,000 contents coverage. Sometimes even up to full replacement value. Sometimes there is no waiting period for the private flood policy. Some carriers do have a 14-day waiting period. It's important that you read your policy, talk with your agent, and make sure you understand going into it what you have. It can offer, so the private flood insurance policy can offer broader protection for better rates. There are other important considerations, which we won't go into great detail, but your basement coverage is limited on the federal product, where it has more coverage available, generally speaking, on the private flood options. And your claims process varies, private flood insurance versus the federal product as well. And we won't get too deep into elevation certificates, but sometimes they're required for best pricing on the federal product, and oftentimes they're just optional on the private policy. So what we need to do now that you have your policy or policies in place, you need to be prepared for the flood itself. To do that, I would recommend doing a home inventory. And you can do this one of several ways. If you are a paper person, you can make a list, write everything down, keep your receipts for your high purchases, anything expensive, spreadsheets, etc. Another option, which I recommend, is you just take your cell phone, put it on record, and you walk slowly through your property, opening drawers, closet doors, basements, attics, garage spaces, etc. And you've basically just created for yourself a digital inventory. My cell phone backs up automatically to the cloud, so even if my phone is lost in the flood, I would still be able to retrieve the digital inventory that I've created, which reminds me to tell you, if you do the paper version, don't keep the only copy on the property that you're doing this for. Put it in a safe deposit box off-site, maybe a friend's house or relative's house, someplace like that, so that you have access to that if you do the paper version. Keep your receipts and appraisals, and you want to update this regularly. If you do a major renovation, a major purchase, anything like that, update your inventory. In the event that a flood has happened, these are the steps that you should take. The very first thing is always going to be to contact your insurance company or agent immediately. They will give you guidance as to what you are required to do, and just follow their advice. Don't do anything that they don't tell you to do, and make sure you do what they do tell you to do. They're going to probably ask you to document your damage. That could be videos, photos, take notes, document everything. Keep receipts if you make temporary, if they tell you to make temporary repairs. Maybe you're getting a pump, or you're using tarps, or you're going to board up something. Keep your receipts for that, because that'll be reimbursable. Follow your insurance company's advice to not jeopardize your coverage, and don't make any permanent repairs on your own unless you are specifically instructed to do so, which I do not think you will be. And timelines are critical. Every piece of documentation and every minute really counts, so you really want to make sure that the first call you're making is to your insurance agent or company. If you do run into any issues at all, I mean, the New Hampshire Insurance Department is just a phone call away. We're here to assist. Just some final thoughts: that flooding in New Hampshire is more common than most people realize, and that insurance is the most reliable financial tool for recovery. Options exist for homeowners and renters, whether they live in high risk or low risk areas. And it's really important that you review your policy. Make sure you understand what's covered, what isn't covered. Have conversations with your agent. They're your first point of contact for questions and concerns, and they'll be able to guide you with endorsements that might be available to you that actually fill a gap that you have. The best thing before a flood is to make sure you have everything in order. We're always here at the New Hampshire Insurance Department to help you if you have any questions or concerns. And I'd like to, at this point, show some helpful resources. The next 3 slides are going to have different links for you to go to, and it'll help guide you with any other information that you might need. For coverages, we highly recommend the trustedchoice.com website. It's a very easy website to use. You click on that and you go in and you say where you live and what you're looking for. It will pair you with, it'll give you a list of agents near you that can assist you. Get a few different quotes. Not every insurance agent is going to represent the same panel of insurance companies. Try different insurance agents, get the policy that fits you best if you're looking for private flood options. And the last slide I'm going to share with you today would be our contact information. I've said it before, we're just a phone call away. We're a bunch of people that love talking about insurance and love helping. So just give us a call if you have any questions or concerns. And with that, I'd like to send it back to Sarah and Stephanie.
Thank you, Luann. So I think now we have quite a while for questions if people have them. So you can put questions both in the chat or the Q&A, and we will answer any questions you have. So while people are typing, I want to reiterate, Luann said that flooding is much more common than we think here in New Hampshire. And Merrimack County is actually has experienced the second highest number of presidentially declared disasters in the country, second to Washington County, Vermont. And most of those are due to flooding. So that just kind of reiterates the point of at least like central and southern New Hampshire, flooding is common and it does have large devastating impacts. All right. I am not seeing any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So I think we will end it a little early. So this recording will be available and we should be posting it on our OPD YouTube page. So you can view the recording afterwards, especially those of you who were having issues viewing the screen. Okay, I guess we did have a question in the Q&A. It's loading up. Okay, so is the New Hampshire Insurance Department taking any steps to help promote a private flood market?
That's an excellent question. So my role here at the New Hampshire Insurance Department, as I mentioned, is the supervisor for P&C forms compliance. Basically, what we do in a nutshell is any admitted company that wants to sell an insurance product in the state of New Hampshire, first they need to, for personal lines and for a lot of commercial lines, they need to submit their forms that they wish to use to us for review and approval before they can start using them. They also need to submit rates and rules, but that's an actuary function, and I'm going to speak more on the form side. When we receive the forms from a company, we review every document and make sure that it's in compliance with all of the state laws and regulations. If not, we object and we make the company change it so that the product is 100% compliant as written with the current New Hampshire laws and regulations. I tell you that to tell you this. Once a product is approved for use and their rates and rules have been approved by our actuary department, then the insurance company, the admitted insurance company, can sell the product to New Hampshire. We have dozens of different insurance companies currently that have approved private flood insurance products for use in New Hampshire. And they range. That's one of the differentiators between the federal product, which I know that Sarah already mentioned, that is more of a standardized product, standardized pricing. She did a really good job going over the premium pricing for the federal product. In the private side, that is not the case. So products can vary, they can differ, they can provide more coverage, less coverage, more exclusions, less exclusions, and the price can be different. That's why we really encourage you to go to an independent agent and compare different products from different companies. There are dozens approved for use. I don't have an exact number. I want to say like 44, but don't quote me on that, that are available for use today. You just have to find an agent that represents the companies, and then they'll start the process for you. That's a really good question. Thank you.
And just to add on to that, so while FEMA has a requirement for if you have a federally backed mortgage, you are required to purchase flood insurance. That can be either a public or a private flood insurance. It just has to have a certain coverage. So you are not required to buy the NFIP coverage. You can choose a exclusively private coverage. But yeah, the requirement to obtain insurance is still there, but it can be either public or private. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, which I'm not seeing any more come through, I think we're going to end the presentation here. And for those of you who are subscribed to our Floodlines newsletter, we will be sending out some daily information and resources throughout the week, since it is Flood Awareness Week. But yeah, I encourage you all to take a look through any of the resources that we linked here, explore your community's floodplain ordinance and regulations, and get familiar with all of the resources that we have here at the state throughout the insurance department or BEA. There are many state agencies which all participate in floodplain management to some degree. All right, well, thank you so much for coming today. And I hope you have a wonderful day.